Hello, everybody. I've been enjoying Skyrim a lot. Now, the gameplay. Let me tell you this. It is fantastic. I love the story. I've completed the game. It's fantastic. But I'm gonna tell you is this. The problem is with this game is the graphics. The graphics aren't terrible. The graphics have potential. It's just the way Bethesda have rendered the game. They've rendered them for the consoles and then ported it back to the PC. Now, what I'm asking you modders out there, if you are watching this video, we all need to band together. Fuck Bethesda. Bethesda isn't gonna release DirectX 11 or isn't gonna. They're not gonna like release support for Crossfire, like none of that shit. So what I'm saying, we're gonna have to do that ourselves. We gotta figure out. We gotta patch the game ourselves for DirectX 11, or at least DirectX 10. I mean, come on. Like it does. It still uses DirectX 9. The shadows, this is one of the most important things. If we want to mod our game so it runs smoothly at 60 frames per second, if we want us to get 60 frames per second, we need to get rid of that bottleneck. And that bottleneck is caused by the shadows. Now the shadows, what I have noticed, the shadows are being rendered on the CPU. Now that may be good for the PS3 because the PS3 has maybe, I don't know, like it's because the PS3 has kind of a okay CPU and it has a really shit graphics card. So what they did is they rendered the shadows on the CPU to offload some stuff from the GPU of the shitty PS3. We're gonna have to recode somehow, figure out how to recode the fucking shadows so they run off of our powerful GPUs. Because let's say you have like a GTX 560 Ti, even a 6850 or a 6950. That pretty much that area, like a 5830, like anywhere that's like off. Like the 2010 graphics cards, there was like the 58 series and the 400 GTX. Anywhere from there to what we've got now should be able to run 60 frames per second. But they don't because of the bottleneck. We need to get rid of that bottleneck. That bottleneck is horrible. Like let's say you got like I don't know, even a fucking AMD CPU should get 60 frames per second. An AMD CPU is okay. Like it shouldn't bottleneck that much. I don't have an AMD CPU. I have an Intel CPU, and I bottleneck like crazy. I turn like just to tell you. I did a test myself just a few minutes ago. What I did was I turned off the shadows. Okay. Now I was getting before turning off the shadows, I was getting anywhere from 35 to 50 frames per second, no more than 50. It was never ever gonna go more than 50 frames per second. So, and that wasn't looking in the sky. I wasn't looking in the sky. If I looked in the sky, I'd probably get like 80 frames per second. I don't know. But anyway, so I turned off the shadows. Now I had 8 times anti-aliasing, 1920 by 1080, and I was getting 50 frames per second. Now let's say I turned off the anti-aliasing, lowered my resolution to 800 by 600, which is the lowest resolution. I got 35 to 50. And I was like, what the fuck? I lowered my anti-aliasing, lowered my resolution, and I did not get a performance gain. Now, so that basically means the shadows are being rendered on the CPU. There is no other explanation for this. And when I turned off the shadows, and then what you do to turn off the shadows is that there is this little text line in the ini that says something F distant shadows. I can't remember how it goes, but I have it set on ultra usually. Well, what you do is you turn that number to 0 so that the draw distances are so low that on the shadows that they don't even show up. So effectively, you turn off the shadows. So yes, I turned off the shadows, and I was getting like 70, 80 frames per second by turning off the shadows. So yeah, I turned off the shadows. I was getting like 70, 80 frames per second. Now, I was getting like, let's be more realistic, it was more like 60 to 70, but that was still a performance gain. Like, I had 8 times anti-aliasing at 1920 by 1080, and I was getting like 70 frames per second. Now, before the shadows, I was getting 50 frames per second. So I know for sure there's a bottleneck because of the shadows. The shadows retardedly rendered on the CPU. Now, it'd be okay if it'd be rendered on CPU if we had like a 16 core CPU from about 4 years from now, and we rendered that efficiently on every single core that we can, except for that one core that needs to render Windows. That would be good, but we don't have that, and I don't think Bethesda is going to make a game run on 15 cores. Um, but besides that, besides we gotta render that shit on the GPU. We've got powerful GPUs that are at our disposal, and we can't even use them to our full advantage. So yeah, so yeah. Like I'm saying, if there's any modders out there, we gotta all you modders out there, we gotta work together to get this shit working all on the GPU. And another thing is, if we can, we should patch the game ourselves so we can get DirectX 11 and tessellation. Because because like put it this way, if I can handle around 60, 70 frames per second without tessellation, I could probably handle like 30 frames per second with tessellation. Um, Probably, I mean. And of course, we'd also have to make it so that the drivers work well with Crossfire and SLI, preferably SLI, because I kind of want to like more. I want to like more Nvidia, but I've got a 6950, and sometimes I'm like, hey, hi Nvidia, I want you to be good. Uh, I'm like confused sometimes. I don't know which one is really better, Nvidia, ATI, which one? So yeah, I went with ATI, but that's another story for another day. But yeah, we gotta get that shit working efficiently. So I've noticed I've seen a lot of mods right now of the retextures, like people retexturing the game. That's really nice. Um, like armor retextures and building retextures. Honestly, I can handle that pretty well because I lock in my frame rate to 30 frames per second because of the bottlenecks in this game, and it runs pretty smoothly. It runs like it runs 30 frames per second the whole every time, everywhere. Like it never goes below 30 frames per second, except if I go to the edge of town and I look in, because I've got this texture mod in the town of Whiterun, and that weighs heavily. I think it weighs really heavily on my graphics card because I did a test and I was able to prove that it wasn't just my shadows. It was actually the because usually the shadows are a huge bottleneck, and I removed the shadows and it wasn't quite the shadows bottleneck, and it was actually my graphics card having to work a hell of a lot to keep up with the textures. I was getting at the edge of town. I was getting like 28 frames per second looking into the town because of the texture mod. That's when you know it. That's when you know your graphics card is being pushed to its limit. You're getting 28 frames per second. You're just at 30 frames per second. Anyway, I'm gonna have to end the video. It's coming at around 10 minutes. So I'm not gonna beg you, but if you want to, subscribe. And later I'm probably gonna do a let's play of Skyrim. More of a technical look of things than well, I do enjoy the game actually, but yeah. So don't forget to leave a comment, subscribe, and like the video, and work together at making these mods better. Goodbye.